The Undead Age, Origin Stories, an Undead Age novella, written by A.M. Geever, narrated by Jeannie Marshall. Father Walter Brennan, Monday, September 14th, 2026, Santa Clara, California. Father Walter Brennan surveyed his dreary office through narrowed eyes. No amount of sprucing up could hide the fact that the Department of Mathematics and Computer Science at Santa Clara University was in a basement. At least my new office has a window, he thought, even if it was one of those long, narrow, almost near the ceiling kinds of a window. Sunlight still streamed through it, unlike his first office at the university in Galway, Ireland, not far from where he had grown up. That windowless hovel had felt like a dungeon. Walter checked his watch. 7:45 a.m. Enough time for a cup of tea, he thought, his mind already jumping ahead to his lecture. He reached for his keys, but froze mid-motion. Shouting, then a strangled scream from the hallway. What on earth? He thought, hurrying to the door. Walter would never forget the sight that awaited him. Allison Landry, Advanced Calculus, and Sebastian Nichols, Automata Theory and Formal Languages, sprawled on the floor at the bottom of the stairs that led down to the basement from the building's south entrance. A slight woman in her early 60s, Allison had knocked the younger and stronger Sebastian to the ground. She was ripping Sebastian's throat out with her teeth. Bright red blood spurted in high, thin arcs before spattering on the worn linoleum. Sebastian's strangled gurgles, punctuated by Allison's animal-like grunts, sent cold shivers up Walter's spine. Sebastian flailed without effect against his attacker. For a moment, shock rooted Walter right where he stood. Holy Mother of God. Walter dashed toward them and grabbed one of Allison's arms. Allison turned and lunged at him, Sebastian's blood dripping from her chin, then abruptly jerked back. A very tall, slender young man had grabbed Allison's other arm, a visiting assistant professor, but from a different department. Walter had met him, but couldn't remember his name. He was so slender he looked like he would blow over in a breeze, but he held Allison fast. Allison snapped and snarled between them like a rabid dog. "What the hell is wrong with her?" the visiting assistant professor asked. Walter couldn't answer. He didn't know how to process what he was seeing, nor interpret it. "Get something to tie her up," visiting assistant professor shouted. No one heard him above the din of people streaming into the narrow corridor that ran the length of the building. Allison thrashed like a wild animal. Despite her wasted appearance, Walter could barely keep hold on her arm. Her strength was simply unbelievable. They had to get her restrained before she hurt anyone else. Walter looked around for something that might work when he spied an extension cord hanging on the corner of an AV cart just a few feet away. "I'm going to grab that card from the cart," Walter said. "I'll only be able to keep one hand on her arm. Hold tight." Visiting assistant professor nodded. His fine, sandy-colored hair fell into his eyes before he tossed his head to clear his line of vision. Walter reached for the cord. He almost lost his grip on Allison's arm, but visiting assistant professor proved loads stronger than he looked. Together, they tied Allison to a chair. Walter turned to see John Seshla, the department chair, trying to staunch the wound on Sebastian's neck with a gym towel. Sebastian had become very still. Walter could see he was not breathing. "I think he's gone. Why don't you let me take over?" "The ambulance will be here soon, Walter. They can help him." "I'll just say a prayer then." Walter knelt beside Sebastian's body. He felt wetness against his knee. Dear God, he had knelt down in Sebastian's blood. He didn't have any oil and could not remember if Sebastian was practicing anything, despite having known him for over 5 years. He decided it didn't matter. He traced a small cross on Sebastian's forehead with his thumb. "Through this holy anointing, may the Lord in his love and mercy help you with the grace of the Holy Spirit. May the Lord who frees you from sin save you and raise you up." Hearing Walter say the last rites seemed to get through to John better than trying to reason with him. He let go of the towel on Sebastian's neck. "What the hell is this, Walter?" Walter shook his head. "I don't know." He was about to ask if anyone had called 911 when he saw almost every student in the hallway filming the unfolding horror show on their cell phones. Walter covered more ground in 3 steps than he ever thought possible and snatched the phone out of the nearest boy's hand. "Hey!" the kid protested. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Walter snapped at the students, his brogue stronger in his anger. He pointed to the north entrance at the other end of the building. "Get out of here! Now!" The wail of approaching sirens signaled help was on the way. Walter turned back to his homicidal colleague, who growled and thrashed against the cord that held her fast. The blood on her face had started to dry, flaking away where the smears were thin. Blood still coated her teeth, as if she had no saliva to dilute it. "Allison," he said, "why did you do this?" No answer, just growls and moans. "I met her last week. She complained she was coming down with a cold, but she looked fine at the new faculty reception yesterday. Now she looks like death warmed over," visiting assistant professor said. Walter had seen Allison the day before as well. The transformation, sunken eyes with dark circles, shriveled and chapped lips, the reek of decay, was astonishing. "She looks like she's lost 20 pounds overnight," Walter said, "and her eyes, it's like she's not even there." The doors behind them burst open. Campus security pounded down the stairs, followed by paramedics who knelt beside Sebastian's prone form. A dark-haired woman paramedic checked his pulse, then shook her head. "He's gone." The campus security officers gaped at Allison and the bloody body at their feet. One of them shook himself, seeming to remember that he should be taking charge. Who can tell me what happened here?" "I suppose I can," Walter said when no one else answered. "I heard shouting in the hallway." "Hey, he's moving!" The officer turned back. Walter stepped forward. Sebastian twitched. The woman paramedic put her hand to Sebastian's bloody, ruined neck. "I don't have a pulse." "The guy's moving," the other paramedic said, not looking up from the IV he had started prepping. "Get a dressing on his neck." "There's no pulse," the first paramedic insisted. Her partner reached over to check for himself. Sebastian's eyes opened. Then he turned his head toward the man's extended hand and bit him. "Get him off me!" The woman paramedic scrambled to assist her partner. The campus security officer rushed into the fray. Sebastian's arms and legs were moving. He let go of the screaming paramedic's hand, and the man scurried backwards. Then Sebastian grabbed the woman paramedic's arm and bit her too. Things seemed to happen in slow motion and fast forward all at once after that. Walter watched as more campus security streamed through the doors behind Sebastian and the paramedics, bottlenecking on the stairs. Sebastian had already attacked the first officer, but not before the man tased him in the chest. Sebastian never slowed down. He smashed the poor man's head against the wall with a sickening crack before beginning to gnaw on him. Bodies pressed against Walter as people tried to get away, their screams and shouts echoing off the walls. He was pushed into the AV cart and lost his footing as it rolled from the force of the impact. Walter stumbled, trying to right himself. People were panicked. He would be trampled if he fell. He extended his arm, and when his hand hit the floor, he pushed hard. Regaining his footing, he got clear of the AV cart, which bounced like a pinball against the fleeing onlookers. He heard more screams behind him and looked back. Someone had gotten too close to Allison, who was still tied to the chair. The pandemonium intensified as Santa Clara police entered the building from the other end of the corridor, blocking the only escape route. And still Sebastian lurched down the hall. Walter felt 2 strong hands grab his shoulders. He cried out in panic and struggled against them, but was pulled backward into darkness. A heavy door slammed shut with a metallic thud. Walter heard a sliding lock shoved into place. "Help me push against the door," visiting assistant professor said, his voice barely a whisper. Struggling to tamp down his panic, Walter realized he was in the building's tiny maintenance room. Feeble light trickled in from a tiny glass block window near the ceiling. He could barely make out a drum of cleaning solvent against the wall. Walter pulled while visiting assistant professor pushed. As his eyes adjusted to the poor light, Walter saw 3 more people crammed in with them against the back wall. The chaos on the other side of the door intensified. Gunfire and screams reverberated down the hallway. More sirens wailed, some distant, some near. Walter and the rest of the occupants of the tiny room huddled together as far away from the door as possible. "Do you think we'll be safe in here?" a young woman's voice asked. Visiting assistant professor said, "It's better than the hallway." "There's no way out but the door," she said, not quite disagreeing. "We're trapped." "I think we're safer in here," Walter said. Under his breath, he muttered, "Please God, let help be here soon." As soon as the words left his mouth, Walter realized that the police and campus security were already here, and he felt safer in this closet. A man's voice, high with fright. "The guy from campus security tasered him, and he didn't even slow down." No one had anything to say after that. They fell silent, listening to the screams and shouts and gunfire. Sirens seemed to be coming from every direction. Dark shadows flickered across the cracks of light around the door. The astringent smell of cleaning fluid and furniture polish permeated the stuffy air. Walter looked up at visiting assistant professor. "You saved my life, and I don't even know your name." A ghost of a smile lifted the corners of visiting assistant professor's mouth. Walter could not tell the color of his eyes, but the tiny expression transformed the young man's delicate features into movie star handsomeness. He stuck out his hand. "Doug Michelle, Astrophysics Florida State. I'm here to work with... I can't even remember." "I'm Walter Brennan," Walter said before adding inanely, "I teach algebra and statistics." "What the hell do you get up to here in math and CS, Walter?" Doug whispered. "I'm not complaining, but why is there a lock on the inside of this door?" Walter looked at the lock, then back to Doug. "I'm sure I don't want to know." Connor McGuire. Tuesday, September 15th, 2026. Guasapa, El Salvador. Connor spread his fingers apart between the slats of the blinds and looked at the street below. The street lights cast no illumination, nor would they. The bulbs that helped the creatures see had been smashed, if they could see. No one was sure about that. They could definitely hear. That had been obvious from the start, by the way their heads tilted as they tried to locate their prey, and from the moans that began at one end of a mass of them, rippling across the wretched assemblies until the moans and hisses and snapping teeth stretched from one end to the other. Dark forms darted from spot to spot on the street, a bus stop shelter, a portico, a pickup truck. Before the sun set, he'd seen other variations. People frozen in place, a tense stillness so complete that they were sometimes overlooked by the ravenous creatures. He could almost see the frantic energy coiling below the surface of their skin that exploded when they thought they could make a break for safety. It didn't work every time, but once was enough to perhaps get that person to the next time, when they might get lucky again. "Agua, por favor," a weak voice whispered. Connor stepped back from the window, a quieting finger to his lips. He needn't have bothered. Sor Juana's voice was far too weak to travel beyond the walls of the small room, but the lesson of quiet and stealth, so newly learned, demanded compliance. If noise meant death, silence meant not life, but the possibility of it. He let the blanket that covered the window fall back into place. He skirted the table and crossed to the old nun, lighting the candle on the bedside table, before holding the glass of water to her lips. She seemed to weaken from minute to minute now, unable to lift her head when just an hour ago she had been sitting upright. Her face flushed red, but her papery skin felt cool under his fingers, and her teeth chattered. Connor had seen others stuff the mouths of the sick with cloth to mask the sound of clacking enamel, but could not bring himself to do so. Sor Juana was so frail, so diminished by the infection that ravaged her body. Gagging her would be an act of violence he couldn't bring himself to inflict upon her. The rest of the tiny clinic at the back of the monastery was empty. Everyone else had fled. Connor didn't blame them. If he hadn't promised Brother Tomas that he would look after Sor Juana until he returned, Connor would have joined them. The illness and chaos that had ravaged San Salvador was repeating itself in this hamlet outside of Guasapa. Brother Tomas was hours overdue, which probably meant he wasn't coming back. But Connor had given his word and would keep it. Over the past week, he had seen almost everyone he knew break the promises they had made in good faith in order to survive. He would keep this last one before he began to break his promises, too. Maybe she'll be different, he thought. He hoped, he prayed. But he knew she wouldn't be. Miracles were more scarce than ever. Sor Juana would end up like the rest. The knowledge that an end to her suffering meant that the old nun would not slow him down when he finally left filled Connor with a shame equal to his relief. Preemptive penance, another reason he stayed. He blew out the candle and sat on the floor at the foot of the bed, holding a ragged pillow in his lap. It would not be long now. Connor jerked awake. The lack of light was so complete that he couldn't see the hand he raised to his face to reassure himself that he hadn't gone blind. What the hell had woken him? Because something had yanked him from his accidental slumber, but he didn't hear anything that might have been the culprit. An electric current of fear shot through his body. The silence had woken him. He could not hear Sor Juana's labored breathing or chattering teeth. He waited, hoping that the silence might be one of the long, uneven pauses between breaths common to those balancing on the precipice between life and death. He strained to hear a ragged breath or a delicate wheeze. He only needed one to give him time to smother her with the pillow still clutched in his hands. Nothing but silence. Then the rancid aroma of loosened bowels. She had died just now. He had missed his opportunity to release the old woman with no danger to himself by seconds. He leaned forward, reaching for the handle of the pointy carpenter's rasp tucked inside his back pocket. The worn handle, smoothed and polished by decades of oil and sweat, slipped into his palm with a velvety softness. The bed springs creaked, followed by a hiss like a leaking bicycle tire. The window overlooking the street was directly opposite where Connor sat. If he pulled down the blanket that covered it, there would be enough moonlight to help him see, to enable him to perform the terrible epilogue to his promise. He vaulted into the darkness. A snarling grunt followed him, and a hand closed around his ankle. Connor fell to the floor, the metallic rattle of the rasp skittering away, filling his ears. He lurched onto his hands and knees, thrashing his captured leg like a donkey giving a hind leg kick. The grip on his ankle loosened, and he shook himself free, scrambling to his feet. 2 steps later, he slammed into the table. In his haste, he'd forgotten about it. Sor Juana's high-pitched moan filled the room. She rammed into his back, a warhammer wielded by an angry god. He fell over the table, all the air expelled from his lungs. A snap of teeth caught the sleeve of his shirt, missing his arm by a hair's breadth. The fabric ripped as Connor reared back and twisted around, choking, unable to suck enough air into his lungs. He pushed her off and rounded the corner of the table, not turning his back on her. The impact as she collided with him again traveled up his right arm. He stumbled backward against the window, the clatter of the falling blinds deafening as they fell to the floor. The blanket that had covered the blinds fluttered down, snaring them both. The stench of rotting meat hit him like a punch to the face. Connor twisted his head to the side, constrained by the blanket covering them both, the snap of teeth beside his ear impossibly loud. He pushed against the old nun and rolled, the blanket flapping around them. And a sudden memory of playing blob with his cousins surfaced. The game consisted of sitting along the inside edge of a blanket on the floor, holding onto it with one hand. At the count of 3, they all yelled, "Blob!" and rolled into the center, wrapping the blanket around themselves as they bumped into one another, laughing and giggling. Then they had smoothed out the blanket to do it again. Connor flailed against the blanket, the strings of the blinds, the old nun, the darkness enveloping him in this deadly version of blob, even as the childish laughter of his cousins echoed in his head. His hand slipped beyond the blanket's edge. He clutched it and freed his head, then pulled the blanket over Sor Juana's face. Her snapping teeth scraped against his cheek, but the blanket blunted their deadly purpose. Weak moonlight shone through the window, throwing the room into the sharp relief of gray and black. Connor tightened the blanket around Sor Juana's neck. He searched the room. The end of the rasp handle poked into the moonlight from a shadow a few feet away. He slid over on his ass, dragging the thrashing woman with him. He picked up the rasp, then felt the front of her face through the blanket to locate her eyes. "God bless you, sister," he whispered. Connor jammed the rasp into her eye through the blanket. The textured metal rod punctured the eye socket and slid into her brain. Sor Juana slumped, her body dead weight against him. He pushed her away and sat for a moment, catching his breath. Outside, the moans of the creatures in the street grew louder. Staying on his knees, he peeked over the windowsill. The commotion had attracted their attention. 40 or so stood below the window, moaning. More were coming down the street and from nearby alleys, stumbling like drunkards in the moonlight. Connor climbed to his feet and found his pack. He checked the contents one last time. Water, some food, leather gloves, an extra flannel shirt, 3 pairs of socks, the CD he had found, and the tool set. The pistol given to Brother Tomas by a man with unsavory connections, who was rumored to be a sicario, was there too. He wrapped the CD in the extra shirt. God only knew when he could listen to it, but if he ever did, he wanted Miranda to be with him. "I just want the chance to tell her that I know I fucked up." He pushed the mistakes he'd made with Miranda aside. He couldn't do anything about it now. He had to stay alive if he ever wanted to make things right, so he had to focus on the here and now. He refastened the Rolex watch that a reporter from home had traded for his car. It had come loose in the scuffle with Sor Juana. Connor would have given the reporter the car. He knew where he could get a motorcycle, and he wanted something that he knew how to fix, since he had no idea how far he needed to travel to reach safety. But he'd accepted the trade when the reporter offered. He might be able to trade such an expensive watch for something he needed later on. It wasn't as bad in the States yet, the reporter had told him. Connor clung to the hope that the reporter was still right. He tucked the rasp and the gun into the waistband of his jeans, then glanced out the window. The number of creatures in the street had tripled. He would exit at the other end of the building, on the far end of the block, where he hoped less of them congregated. Connor shrugged into his jacket, then the backpack. He stepped into the hallway, resisting the urge to look back at poor Sor Juana, and fled, like all the others. Emily McGuire. Wednesday, September 16th, 2026, Los Altos, California. Emily pushed the sleek glass door open, squinting as the bright afternoon sun assaulted her eyes. Superheated air, dry and hot, radiated up from the black concrete sidewalk. She dug into the debris field that doubled as her purse as she stalked across the parking lot of Sonalto's cookie-cutter tech company campus. Her platform sandals clicked against the pavement. "What a bunch of pretentious assholes," she thought. She yanked her keys free of a tangled charging cord and jammed her sunglasses over her nose. "Where did I park?" Angered by the interview, she'd walked out of the building blindly. She started clicking the unlock button on the car's ignition dongle on the same key ring with her house, garage, and bicycle lock keys, heard a bleep, and realized she had passed it. Once inside, she turned on the air conditioning and reached for her phone, then backed out of the parking spot. The hands-free speaker picked up as the line began to ring. Almost immediately, the call went to voicemail. "This is Miranda, and you almost reached me. Leave me a message and I'll return your call. Maybe." "You were right, Mary. High Tech is a boys' club, and the interview was a total waste of time. The guys interviewing me, all guys, were such dicks. They kept talking about disrupting the market space, like they were so clever they could reinvent the wheel or something. At the end, they asked me one of those stupid brain teasers questions like people said Google used to do. I was so fed up. I told them it had nothing to do with being a marketing intern and that they only asked it to feel superior by making people squirm when they couldn't figure it out." She chuffed out a laugh. "You should have seen their faces." Emily pushed harder on the gas pedal. The shiny smoked glass and steel building, the pretentious organic mini orchard of orange and lemon trees on both sides of the winding main drive of Sonalto's corporate campus. She couldn't get away from the place fast enough. Why did I ever think I wanted to work at an agri-tech company anyway? She thought. 3 short beeps pinged through the car's speakers. My phone's almost dead, Miri. I hope your day's going better than mine. Talk to you later. Emily pushed the end call button on the steering wheel, then pulled at the charging cord for her phone, glancing away to plug it in. When she looked back up, a man staggered from the fruit trees into the path of her car, his hand upraised as if he were hailing a cab. She slammed on the brakes and saw his eyes go wide as he realized she couldn't stop in time. The thud as her car and his body collided made her stomach turn somersaults. She fumbled with the button on the seatbelt. First her hands, then her entire body started to shake. She scrambled out of the car on unsteady legs. Oh, please don't be dead. Jesus, please don't be dead, she pleaded as she ran to the crumpled figure. The man had landed yards away from where she had struck him. He moaned and stirred as she knelt beside him. Oh, thank God, Emily said, relieved that he was alive, before taking in his awkward landing and ripped shirt. Blood from a gash on his temple coursed over his face. Shit. Emily dropped her keys and pulled off her suit jacket, stuffing it under the man's bloody head. His light brown eyes came into focus. He raised his arm. No, don't get up, Emily cried, catching his arm. The man pulled free and pointed in the direction he had come from. He whispered something, but she couldn't hear what he said. I'll call an ambulance, she said, realizing that her phone was still in the car. Don't get up, I'll be right back. She started to stand, but the man grabbed her wrist. The strength of his grip startled her. Then he let go and pointed. His voice was weak, but urgent. Run! Confused, Emily followed the line of his pointing arm. There were people walking through the little fruit tree orchard, a lot of them. They stumbled and shuffled, many obviously limped. They bumped into one another without acknowledgement. It was odd. Why were they walking on a private corporate campus at least a mile from a pedestrian walkway? Help! Emily shouted as she jumped to her feet, shoving the strangeness of the people aside, because she needed help. A woman walked out from the leafy fruit trees. Her floral print dress was ripped at the shoulder and stained with something dark and brown. She wore one shiny red pump so that the gait of her stride alternated, up, down, up, down. Her skin looked gray and leathery. What the hell? Emily thought, taking a step back. Then another person and another neared the edge of the orchard. They too were injured and blood-soaked and looked sick. But worst of all was when they started to moan. Emily's skin began to crawl as the most unnatural sound she had ever heard filled the air. But the moaning wasn't just in front of her. She turned around to discover more people nearing the tree line on the other side of the drive. Fear shot through her body, sudden and electric. Emily looked at the man, desperation filling her chest. He was unconscious, maybe dead, and outweighed her by 100 pounds, but she couldn't leave him. She slid her hands under his shoulders, gripped him under his arms, and pulled. He barely budged. She looked back up at the moaning, bloody people beginning to stumble out of the trees. They didn't seem to move very fast, but were closing the distance. Emily pulled again, every muscle in her body quivering with effort, but she hadn't moved him an inch. She looked at the man. He had told her to run. My phone is in the car. I'll call the police. She sprinted for her car, jumped inside, slammed the door shut, and fumbled for her phone, panic making her fingers feel like jelly. One by one, people staggered out from the trees. 911 picked up on the first ring. All circuits are busy. Please try your call again. All circuits... Fuck! She'd drive back to Sonalto. People were there, normal people, and they could call 911. They could help her. She jammed in the clutch and stabbed at the start button. Nothing happened. She looked to the center console, but her keys weren't there. Frantic now, she searched the passenger seat and the floor. She cast a desperate look out the windshield to see how close the people were. Oh my God, no! They were attacking the man she had hit, snarling and biting, falling on him like wild animals. And then she saw her keys, glittering in the sun while blood pooled around them and the car's ignition dongle. She had dropped them when she took off her jacket. The staggering, moaning nightmare of people from the trees who had not stopped to attack the man were almost to the car. She started to pull the door shut when a sudden clarity descended on her. If she stayed in the car, she was dead. Emily flung the car door wide. A man in a green t-shirt and blue jeans lunged at her. He looked almost normal except for the twisted, unnatural angle of his neck. She ducked away from him as she pivoted away from the car, away from the man she had hit, away from the murderous mob pursuing her. She didn't slow as she kicked off her platform sandals. Fear propelled her up the long drive, toward the building she had only minutes before never wanted to set eyes on again, as if the devil himself snatched at her heels. Mario Santarello. Wednesday, September 16th, 2026. Mountain View, California. Mario wrenched the steering wheel of his Audi sports coupe right, steering himself against the dull thud of the woman who had darted into the street in front of him. She twirled, thumping against the length of the car, but didn't fall down. In the rearview mirror, he saw her pick up the handgun she had dropped, then continue running down the street. Thank God she hadn't tried to flag him down. He couldn't stop. He downshifted, taking the corner too fast, tires squealing. His brother's house was halfway down the block of picturesque craftsman bungalows. The street was anything but picturesque now. A house in flames belched black smoke skyward. Bodies littered the street, the sidewalks, the lawns. Some of them stirred or sat up. Others dragged themselves along the ground or shuffled slowly. And then there were the fat ones, the fast ones. None of it made sense. Dominic had not been at the door the last 3 times he'd driven past. He wasn't sure how much longer he could circle the block before they were completely cut off from the freeway. This morning, a friend called him from Los Angeles on a sat phone. She'd told him the National Guard had closed all the freeways. He'd found it hard to believe at first. Something like that would be on the news, and people live-streamed everything nowadays. Until she said cell phone and internet service had been down since yesterday morning. That was when he realized this thing was a lot worse than the authorities were letting on. A middle-aged man sprinted across the street, pursued by an obese woman at a speed that should have been impossible for someone so large. Spidery black veins, as if she had blood poisoning, stood in stark relief against the pale flesh of her jiggling arms and dimpled knees. The front of her white nightgown was a blood-soaked red-brown. Smears of blood covered her face, hands, and arms, even her bare feet. The man tripped, sprawling on the sidewalk. He shrieked like an animal in a trap, an animal that knows it's going to die. The woman closed the distance. The man stumbled to his feet, even though he had to be thinking he would never make it. Mario jammed on the brakes, then opened the window. He aimed the Sig Sauer his neighbor had given him at the woman's head as she pounced, praying as he squeezed the trigger. Headshots on moving targets were difficult, especially for a novice with firearms such as he. The man startled at the sharp report of the gun, but did not stop. The woman's head snapped to the side. A shower of black goop exploded from the far side of her head. She dropped to the pavement with a muffled whump. The man had already disappeared. Mario shoved the clutch into first and hit the gas. He saw a twitch of the blinds in the front window of Dominic's house. Oh, thank God. The front door flew open. His younger brother raced to the curb. He clutched a bloody golf club in his hands, and a backpack dangled from his shoulder. He yanked the passenger door open before the car stopped and dove in. "I started to think you weren't coming back," Dominic said over the roar of the Audi's engine. "Where the hell were you?" Mario said, swerving to avoid running over a body. A staccato burst of gunfire sounded behind them. "This is the 4th time I've been around the block. I couldn't. They were outside. I saw you go by, but I couldn't come." Mario glimpsed a blur of motion at the edge of his peripheral vision as they turned the corner. Then the world jarred and jolted, accompanied by a grinding crunch of metal. The car was shoved sideways, hopping the curb onto the sidewalk and smashing into cafe tables and chairs. They came to rest against the front of an upscale restaurant, its plate glass window shattered with a gunshot-loud crack. A bright yellow table umbrella toppled onto the hood of the car. A blue pickup truck, the blur that Mario had seen, took off. Dominic slammed his hand on the dash. He didn't even stop! Mario concentrated on getting back onto the road without snagging the car on one of the metal chairs. When they thumped back over the curb, he floored it. All around them, the stretch of El Camino that ran through Mountain View looked like a war zone. The wail of sirens grew louder by the moment. A pair of burning cars, now permanently entangled, filled the air with choking smoke. Dominic flinched at every burst of gunfire. Fat but lightning fast, whatever the hell they were, charged up and down and across the streets, intent on catching and eating their neighbors. Others limped along, much slower than the others, but just as dogged in their pursuit. Mario wrenched the Audi's steering wheel back and forth, downshifting and upshifting constantly to get past cars with doors left wide open. "Jim still at work?" Mario asked, stealing a glance at his younger brother. Dominic's face was pale and drawn, his eyes wide. He looked as shell-shocked as Mario felt. "I called him an hour ago. He said everything at Sinalto's campus was fine. He didn't even know what I was talking about." That guy wouldn't notice if water was wet, Mario thought, but fleetingly, he had to keep his attention on the road in front of him. He blew through intersections, heedless of traffic lights. They needed to get off El Camino, but there were only a few major arteries that would get them to I-280. He was afraid to try the side streets after what he had seen while circling Dominic's block. Traffic clogged the road as they neared the turn to El Monte, which led to the freeway. The frustrated bark and hoot of horns filtered through their closed windows. "These things are already here. We can't stop!" Dominic cried, panicked when the Audi slowed. "Shut up, Dom," Mario snapped, trying to think. They would never get through the intersection. Traffic had stopped. People were abandoning their vehicles to flee the hulking figures flitting between them. They only needed to get another 1,000 feet to turn onto El Monte. They could take it all the way to Foothill Expressway if it wasn't too jammed. They should be taking it all the way to 280, but first they had to go to Sinalto to pick up Jim. Mario was so frustrated and scared that he wanted to scream. The last thing they should do was fetch Dominic's boyfriend. He treated Dominic like shit, but that wasn't why Mario didn't want to do it. Something niggled at him just out of reach, insisting that going to Sinalto was a bad idea. Mario wanted to go straight to Genesis and lock himself and Dominic inside the main lab building until everything was under control again. But Dominic thought he was in love with the guy. If Mario refused, he was afraid that Dominic would go on his own and wind up dead. Or worse. He searched frantically for an escape route. They were on the wrong side of the road to cut through the corner shopping center on his left, and had passed the entrance besides. Then he realized the corner around it was landscaped. A car could fit through and get around the clogged intersection. Mario turned, easing the car over the low divider between the lanes. The car behind him, and the one after that, followed. He took the curb onto the sidewalk at a crawl. They couldn't afford the car becoming undrivable. The Audi's wheels spun, kicking up wood chips when he let the clutch out too fast. He let up on the gas enough for the tires to find purchase, then punched it. He winced at the howl of brakes and horns off to his right, followed by grinding metal and a deep boom. A truck had collided with a car. A man hung out of the truck's cab on the driver's side, legs kicking. Blood spattered the inside of the truck's windshield as it skidded and stopped, blocking their path. The Audi shot across the landscaped corner and flew over the curb, landing with an unnerving whoomp. He cranked the steering wheel left and jammed the brakes, barely missing the truck. The Audi fishtailed wildly as he straightened out and hit the gas. He flinched when he realized they were on the wrong side of the road. "You're going the wrong way!" Dominic shouted. The contorted faces of outraged motorists, who didn't realize they were driving to their doom at the gridlocked intersection, swerved out of the way as Mario played a high-speed game of chicken. Adrenaline flooded his sweat-slicked body. Blood rushed in his ears, drowning out the honking horns and squealing tires. When the traffic islands gave way to a center turning lane, he swerved the careening Audi to the correct side of the road. "Slow down, Mario! Jesus!" Nothing was on fire here, but a limping figure with a bloody neck stumbled and tripped over a curb, then climbed to its feet. When they turned right, the road ahead was clear. "Thank God," he gasped. He tried to shift the car into 6th gear, but it wouldn't go. He glanced down to see why. It was already in 6th. When they were half a mile from Foothill Expressway, Mario began to downshift. He let the car drift along at 20 miles per hour. The traffic signals were still working. Nothing was on fire. Cars were not abandoned. A man stood on his lawn with a hose, watering flowers along his driveway. Things looked okay, but he knew it wouldn't last. He swallowed the impulse to shout at the guy, to warn him, but he knew from previous attempts that it would take too long to make him understand, and then he'd look at Mario like he was crazy. There was virtually no traffic on the other side of the intersection beyond the expressway. Traffic on the expressway was heavy, but moving. If they went straight instead of turning left to get Dominic's boyfriend, they might make it to the freeway on time. "We can't go to Sonalto to get Jim," he said, still not sure why he was so certain doing so would be a mistake. "What do you mean, the traffic's fine?" The traffic light was still red. Gently, Mario pressed his foot on the brake, and the thing that he hadn't been able to figure out clicked into place. "It's too close to a hospital." "What?" Dominic said, sounding bewildered. "What's too close to a hospital?" "Sonalto is by a hospital, just like your house. They've been telling people to go to the hospital for 2 days, and now all those people are homicidal or insane. I don't know what they are, but it's spilling out from the hospitals. We can't go." "If you think I'm leaving him—" The light turned green. Mario jammed the clutch into first and peeled through the intersection toward the freeway. "No!" Dominic roared. He grabbed the steering wheel. Its smooth leather wrapping slid under Mario's fingers as the Audi jerked to the right. Mario pulled it back, the tug-of-war bouncing the car like a pinball. Dominic yanked the wheel again and elbowed Mario on the jaw. Mario jammed on the brakes. "Let go, Dominic!" Grinding gears set his teeth tingling when Dominic knocked the gear shift out of gear. The engine stalled as the Audi spun out. Then the right rear fender crunched into a parked car. Mario shoved his brother away, stepped on the clutch pedal, and turned the key in the ignition. "Take me with you!" Both men jumped. A young woman banged on Dominic's window. "Please take me with you!" she begged, starting to cry. She never stopped banging on the window. "We have to get away! They're coming!" Mario pressed the button to open the window. She crouched lower so she could see them better. She wore a nice sleeveless blouse and skirt. Stylish clothes for work, but cheap, like someone just starting out might buy. Her eyeliner was smudged down to her cheekbones. Her up-twisted hair had half fallen down. Her face was flushed a deep pink, and sweat ran down her temples and neck. "I don't know what they are, but they're killing people, eating people!" Mario broke out in a cold sweat. He looked out the window, but everything around them still looked normal. "Where are they?" he demanded. I don't know how far behind they are." Her face screwed up, and she began to cry in earnest. Her whole body shook. Snot ran from her nose that she wiped on her hand. She looked over the roof of the car, like she was checking to see if something had followed her, then crouched back down. "I ran to the building, and they said they would help me," she gasped, her voice rising and falling unevenly. "But then people started screaming, and they were inside. They were inside the building. Nobody listened when I said to run away. They didn't listen, so I ran." What little reserve of composure she had managed to hold on to evaporated. "I lost my phone, and when I asked for help, everyone looked at me like I was crazy. No one would help me," she screeched. "So I ran away." Her breath came in shuddering gasps. She shook so hard that the rest of her hair began to drift down in golden waves. She clutched Dominic's arm through the window, her wild gray eyes imploring them to help her. "You're the only car that stopped." Dominic looked at Mario sidelong, plainly unnerved. They hadn't stopped. They had crashed. And this poor girl thought they were the right people to ask for help? When was this? Where were you? Mario said. He needed to know if they could still make it to the freeway. You don't understand, she said, and for the first time she really did look unhinged. Please take me with you. We have to. Where were you? Dominic demanded. My interview, she said with a hiccuping sob. At Sinalto. I don't know how long ago. Dominic gasped. Mario felt like he was being dragged down into a vat of molasses. She ran from Los Altos, he thought, reeling. That would take half an hour at least, and she was still hysterical with fear. And she'd come from Sinalto, where Dominic's boyfriend was. He'd been right, but fuck. He saw her mouth moving while she tugged on Dominic's arm, and the rapid rise and fall of Dominic's chest, the coil of tension building in his brother's body. Dominic flung the car door open and scrambled out. Dom, come back, Mario shouted, starting to open his door to go after him. But Dominic wasn't leaving. He released the latch on the seat and pulled it forward. The girl scrambled in, her feet bare and stockings torn. Dominic dropped back into his seat and slammed the door shut. Mario could see his brother's hands shake as he buckled the seatbelt. Mario peeled out from the curb, accelerating so fast his body pressed into the seat. He glanced in the rearview mirror. The young woman had turned around in the back seat. She looked out the back window. What's your name? He asked. She jumped at the sound of his voice, then turned around. Emily? Mario glanced at his brother. Dominic looked straight ahead, eyes glassy, jaw clenched, his face a rictus of grief. I'm Mario, he said. This is my brother Dominic. You're gonna be okay. Miranda Tucci, Friday, September 18th, 2026, Santa Clara, California. Miranda? Sam crouched beside where she was huddled in the corner. From the way he looked at her, Miranda realized this wasn't his first attempt to get her attention. Is it time? She asked. Fear made her voice, her whole body shake. Almost. She took the hand Sam offered and let him pull her to her feet. She could hear the things in the corridor, moaning and scraping, snuffling and shuffling. They had been her friends, her classmates, her roommates a few days ago. She didn't know what they were now. It never stopped. The moaning and scraping and shuffling, a 24-hour-a-day soundtrack. She wanted to scream so she didn't have to hear it for a few seconds. She turned toward the hole in the wall to the adjacent dorm room just as her best friend Karen scrambled through it. We're ready, Karen said to Sam. She didn't acknowledge Miranda. I don't think I can do it, Miranda said to Sam, her voice small and unfamiliar. I don't think I can go out there. Chalky dust from the smashed drywall dusted Karen's chestnut brown skin. As her eyes narrowed and her face contorted, she looked like a vengeful spirit. Miranda braced herself for the verbal barrage sure to follow, but Sam cut Karen off with a gesture. You can, Miri, he said, still holding her hand in his. He talked to her like she had seen him talk to his 3-year-old nephew. It's simple. There are holes in the walls between this and the next few rooms. Jill's waiting in the farthest room from here, and I'm going to help her open that door, but it won't open the whole way, so we'll have time to get to the next room. Karen will help push the desk and chairs into place once we're through. A whole bunch of furniture won't stop them, Miranda protested. It's not supposed to. We want them to get through. We just need to slow them down a little. By the time we get back here, they'll still be stuck in the first room, but they'll keep following through the holes in the walls. That will clear out the hallway enough so we can reach the stairwell and the roof. There are people across the courtyard in Benson Center, Miranda. If we can get to the roof, they'll figure out a way to help us, Karen chimed in. For once, she didn't sound angry, but her forbearance felt forced. How long will we be up there? Miranda said. Sam shifted closer to her. The shiny silver of his badge glinted where it caught the light, made brilliant by the black shirt of his uniform. I don't know, but it will be okay. Maybe there's a way to get to a fire escape. Miranda gasped. A cold sweat slicked her body. But they're everywhere on the ground. We can't go down there, Sam. Sam put his first 2 fingers over her lips. We'll think of something, okay? But we cannot stay here, Mary. We can't. If we stay here, we're going to die. It brought her up short to hear him say it so plain. She was so focused on staying away from the things. She had ignored the flip side. If they did not get out of this room, they would be just as dead. What if they're in the stairwell? She said, knowing her protest was futile, but still needing to hold on to the illusion of the dorm room's safety. Sam brushed a strand of auburn hair away from Miranda's face. Don't worry about that right now. Stay quiet like you've been doing. If you do that, you'll be okay. Sam's calm voice was no nonsense and brooked no argument. His calm, cop voice. The first time she'd seen him use it was in a bar to de-escalate a disagreement between 2 drunks. Up to that point, she'd never seen a cop de-escalate anything. Impressed, and because he was cute, she'd complimented him as he passed her table. He stopped to talk, and they'd been dating ever since. Sam made what they needed to do sound simple. She knew it wouldn't be. I got us this far, babe. Trust me, okay? It was true. Sam was the reason that she, Karen, and Jill were alive. The fear that flooded her brain did not recede. It was just that she trusted Sam more. Okay. First Karen, then Sam scrambled through the hole in the wall. She wanted to follow after them, but then she would be closer to the things. She heard the low murmur of their voices. Then Karen's head popped back through. Miranda? Her voice sounded gentle, like the Karen whom she'd always known. You have to pull your shit together, and you have to do it now. I love you, hun, but I am not dying for you. If you freeze or do something stupid, I won't come back. Karen ducked back through the hole. Miranda stared at the empty space where Karen had been, a hollow feeling in her chest. Even her best friend thought she was a liability. Alone for the first time in days, an irrational fear that one of the things had gotten into the room seized her. She whirled around. No monsters, but there was an aluminum baseball bat poking out from under the chair in the corner. She picked it up and felt a little better. Raised voices, human voices. Unable to bear not knowing, Miranda ran to look through the hole in the wall. She crouched down for a better sight line. Figures hovered near another hole in another wall. A scream, high and panicked, pierced the grunts and moans. Miranda scuttled back, fumbling with the bat. Were the others dead? Was she left alone? Banging and more shouting, voices coming closer. A shadow appeared on the other side of the hole to the next room, and she realized she was going to die in this crappy dorm. When Karen bolted through, she smothered a scream. It's Karen, she told herself. Sam crawled through and sprang to his feet. He and Karen flipped the single bed frame on its side and shoved it in front of the hole. Where's Jill? Miranda said. Didn't make it, Sam answered, his voice tight and face pinched. Karen crouched beside the hole to the next room, adjusting the pistol in her waistband. The ones that aren't. Karen stopped, then added softly. They're sniffing around the first barricade. Shh, said Sam. He knelt on the desk that barricaded the door to the hallway. He leaned in, his ear to the door. Minutes ticked by. They're through, Karen whispered. Moans began to emanate from the rooms beside them. The sharp stench of decaying bodies wafted through the hole. How can it smell worse than what's coming from the hallway? Miranda thought, her stomach heaving. No one spoke. Miranda closed her eyes. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of death. Hail Mary, full of grace. They're through the second barricade, Karen whispered. Miranda opened her eyes, not sure how much time had passed while she'd been praying on a non-stop loop. Sam eased off the desk. He and Karen lifted it carefully, as if it were made of spun sugar, and quietly moved it away from the door. Sam put his ear to the door again. He looked over to Miranda and mouthed silently, It's working. Karen joined them at the door. Her body seemed to vibrate like a tightly wound spring poised for attack, for action. Miranda tried to take a deep breath, but her lungs wouldn't cooperate. The room seemed to shrink. Her ears started buzzing. She jumped when a hand closed around her wrist. "It's okay," Sam said softly. "Just breathe. Look at me." Miranda nodded. She tried to breathe, gripped the bat tighter. Sam's focus shifted. She followed his gaze and saw a grasping, bloody hand reach through the small gap at the top of the hole in the wall. Sam pulled the dull black truncheon from his utility belt. He nodded to Karen. With a torpid deliberateness, Karen unlocked the deadbolt. She gripped the doorknob and looked at Sam. "Stay next to me, Miri," Sam whispered. He looked at Karen. "Do it." Karen eased the door open. Sam looked into the hallway, then turned back and nodded. Karen opened the door wider. Sam stepped into the hallway, pulling Miranda with him. She half stumbled before righting herself. When she looked down the hallway, her body froze. Dozens of moaning things shoved and pushed into the room 3 doors down. Puddles of congealing blood slicked the floors and walls. Without air conditioning, the hallway felt stifling, close and hot like cotton packed tight. Panic exploded inside Miranda's chest. Her knees felt watery. After spending so much time trying to be quiet, the grunts and moans of the things sounded amplified, so much it almost hurt her ears. When she felt the tug of Sam's hand on her arm, she yelped. The heads of the things in the hallway turned toward them. Distraction compromised, they bolted down the corridor. Sam reached the stairwell door first and eased it open, then opened it wider and stepped through. He turned back and motioned for Miranda and Karen to follow. As Karen stepped through the door, she cried out and was yanked backwards. Miranda caught Karen's hand. Their outstretched arms kept the heavy metal door to the stairwell open. "Let go, Miranda, save yourself!" Karen had said she wouldn't die for Miranda, but if she let go of her hand right now, she would, and Miranda would live. Karen wouldn't even hold it against her. "No." The voice was so loud, so distinct and sure that if Miranda hadn't known they were alone, she would have looked to see who had spoken. Deep in her belly, something stirred. A hot, furious anger welled up, detonating inside her chest. She felt light and strong instead of heavy and weak. She felt fearless, not like a victim praying for an end to her suffering. She was not going to die today. Neither was Karen. Miranda rammed the heavy door with her right shoulder. She jammed her foot against it to get its weight off of hers and Karen's arms. Karen stretched between Miranda and the thing like an accordion paper doll. The thing tried to reach down for a bite, but every time it did, it started to lose its footing. But more things were just steps behind the one that had Karen, and more behind them, all the way down the hallway. Miranda still held the bat in her right hand, but that shoulder was keeping the door open. She couldn't swing overhead without Karen being pulled away. An underhand swing would only hit Karen. Then she saw the pistol still tucked inside the waistband of Karen's jeans. Miranda dropped the bat. She grabbed Karen's wrist with both hands and heaved. Karen struggled forward 2 steps. She let go of Karen's arm with her right hand and snatched the pistol. Then she pivoted right, swinging her arm up, and fired point blank in the thing's face. A thundering boom echoed off the concrete walls. Black vapor misted the air. The noisy moans receded behind a static buzz. The thing crumpled to the ground, and Karen stumbled forward. As Karen scrambled past her, Miranda fired the pistol at the next one and the next. She took 2 steps backward into the doorway. Faintly she heard, "Miranda, come on!" She glanced up. Sam shouted at her from the stairs. So did Karen, but she could barely hear them through the buzz in her ears. She stepped backward into the doorway. As she pulled the door shut, it caught on the foot of the next thing. She raised the pistol, but then Sam was beside her. "Leave it." She let go of the cool metal bar, felt a shove of Sam's hand in the small of her back. Side by side, they sprinted the stairs to catch up with Karen. She didn't know what the next threat would be, but she couldn't worry about what if she wanted to live. And she did. She wanted to live with a ferocity that frightened her. They reached the door to the roof. Sam pushed it open, slow and cautious. When she followed him through the door, she'd see what came next. But this time, she would be ready to fight. You've been listening to Undead Age Origin Stories, an Undead Age series novella. Want more? The Undead Age audiobooks are coming spring 2021. Sign up for my newsletter at amgeever.com to get advance notice of the release. Written by A.M. Geever. Narrated and produced by Jeannie Marshall. Copyright 2020 A.M. Geever. Production copyright 2020 by A.M. Geever.